everybody. Welcome to the Underwater Photography Show. As always, I'm Matthew Sullivan.
And I'm Alex Mustard.
And today we're going to do a Lembeh recap. So as we have touched on in the previous episode, Alex just got back from Lembeh. Some congratulations are in order because I understand this was your 150th workshop completed. And what better place to do it than one of the coolest places in the world. So congratulations on that. That's amazing. And I can't wait to bug you with questions throughout this whole episode about how it all went. But I know you wanted to talk a little bit about that and the workshop in general and the workshops overall.
Yeah.
So I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, I like these recap episodes that we do after I've been away, when a destination is fresh in your mind. The gear and techniques that really work there are fresh in your mind, and you can often get into certain details about things, which I think you'd never think of bringing up another way. Just as a silly example to kick off with on the gear front, whenever I do muck diving, I always like to dive with a negatively buoyant housing, so that when I dive with that housing out in front of me, it pulls the front of my body down and keeps my legs floating up above the seabed. And I find that a good way to shoot. You're not kicking up sand. You've got minimal impact on the seabed. Obviously, you want to get your camera right down on the seabed, but the rest of you can be just floating up away from it. But I usually dive to the point where I'm actually slightly underweighted, and without my camera, I'd really, really struggle to stay down. But with my camera, I'm perfectly, the whole of us together are nice and neutral. And I never put air in my BCD when I dive in Lembeh or these sorts of places, because thin wetsuit, I don't need to compensate for that. And yeah, I dive that light on the weight. So I was just using a couple of pounds on this trip. But actually, I think I went maybe it's because I'm getting older, this one, but I went slightly too far on the underweighting of myself and the overweighting of the housing. And actually, I got a really bad pain in my hand, which was linked to my tendon or whatever from diving with a heavy camera. So for the second part of the trip, I actually put another weight back in and put a little bit more buoyancy on my camera. So one thing I did learn from this trip is maybe you can take that philosophy a bit too far when you get old and creaky, as I'm starting to become now. I've gone into my 50th year, and yeah, you've got to be a little bit more careful with your body when you're doing these long trips of shooting. You can start getting sore elbow, a sore shoulder from this sort of shooting. But yes, the other aspect of being an old geezer is that it has given me the years to rack up the workshops. And probably 3 or 4 years ago, I was curious as to how many underwater photography workshop weeks or 2-week trips, if they're longer trips, I'd done down the years. And I thought, maybe I'm getting close to 100. And that'd be a great milestone to celebrate. So I counted up all the workshops that I'd done down the years, and discovered I'd already passed 100, and I was on about 120 already. So I'd missed the chance to celebrate 100 workshops. And so I knew the next anniversary was going to be 150. And this one has crept up on me. So I've done a lot of workshops this year, actually, because I think I've done more than 10. So at the beginning of the year, I wasn't even into the 140s. But, so it was really, so nice to hit that landmark. And this was really quite a special workshop because it was a big group. We took over the whole of Lembeh Resort. There is, I think, a lot of the time people don't realise how many resorts there are in Lembeh. People go, oh, well, I can either go to this one or that one, or maybe this one, thinking there's 2 or 3 choices. There's somewhere between 30 and 40 resorts there now, or liveaboards, or that are permanently in the area, or diving operations. There's really a lot of different ones, and they all operate, they all try and find their own little niche out there. And, in general, all of them, know what they're doing diving-wise. It's a part of the world where the first thing they're going to do if you're starting a new resort is employ experienced dive guides from the area. So there's a lot of choice out there. I have been going to Lembeh Resort since the early 2000s, I think 2003 or 4. And I've been taking photographic groups there now for nearly 20 years. So I'm very happy with the relationship I work with them. They're one of the higher end resorts. So what's great about that is I know that my guests are super well looked after, and any issues they have get quickly solved by the resort. So we can really focus on doing maximum teaching every day. There's no, everyone's got fantastic food, fantastic rooms, super happy people. So, and I know if we want to do anything weird, the resort will just make it happen. And as a result, we can squeeze a lot of teaching in. Because we did a whole resort booking, I ran this workshop with another photographer and asked my friend Nick Moore to come and run the workshop with me. But what we decided to do is I been involved in many sort of multi-teacher workshops down the years, and what I always found frustrating about them is the kind of the different photographers would all sort of do a talk each day. One of them would talk one day, one would talk the other. So a lot of the time, as one of the leaders of the trip, you spent most of your time doing nothing, listening to other people speaking, and quite often with some of the people I was there, I was like, no, this is wrong. They shouldn't be saying them. So one of the things that Nick and I came up with for this workshop is that the two of us would not take it in turns to speak. We would run completely different styles of workshop at the same time. So I ran a full sort of macro underwater photography course. It was 24 presentations through the week, some of which were reviews, some of which were lectures. And while Nick focused on one-to-one teaching, and each dive he would join a buddy or a photographer or a buddy team of photographers and dive and shoot alongside them. And then he would then at the next break, meal or whatever, they would download his pictures and their pictures together and compare what they shot and, learn lessons from them. And, he was very happy to go both ways. It was like if they'd done a better job with the subject than him, he'd be like, yeah, your shot is better, and this is why your decisions were better than my decisions. But most of the time it was the other way around, because Nick's a very, very good shooter, particularly of macro. And so we actually ended up running these sort of two workshops at the same time, which I think was really great in terms of the amount of teaching that we were able to squeeze into this workshop. So yeah, it was a really, really enjoyable event. I think it was I would put it down as the best macro workshop that I've taught. I think just the content that we provided, the information that both Nick and I gave to the guests, and the coaching that he did, the teaching that I did, I think really created a really special event. And it was obviously a lot of fun as well, because Lembeh is just so good for diving and photography. I think compared to normal diving in Lembeh, you just go in the water and you're always on something good to shoot. So you just shoot and shoot and shoot. And I shot over 10,000 pictures. Nick, I'm sure, shot a lot more than that because he shoots more than I do. And I know he does. And and all the guests did as well. And across the group, I think my favorite statistic of the workshop is we did 1,159 dives across the workshop group through the trip. So we did a lot of diving. And that's why I always say that the workshops are very good for me understanding what underwater photography gear really works, what gear is reliable. Because, each trip I do, this is just one workshop of that 150. Each trip I do, that's over 1,000 underwater photography dives are taking place sort of underneath my watch. So I get all that, every workshop I go on, I get that huge experience of this is what happens when 1,000 underwater photography dives takes place. What works, what doesn't work, gear, techniques, and that sort of thing.
I'm grateful you explained what was going on with the dynamic with you and Nick, because I had seen some brief mentions on social media about Nick was running a concurrent workshop, but I didn't really catch any details. But I actually like the way that is structured. It sounds interesting to me. And a lot of times, having that one-on-one help with somebody can be really useful. Like you said, even if you're doing all like the main teaching, you're doing that to a big group. Whereas if he can spend some time with an individual person, they have a very specific question or a very specific thing they want to accomplish, it can be easier to do that one-on-one or learn about it one-on-one than with a much bigger
and
group.
he can be very direct about things people are doing. If they're diving overweighted, which is one of the big sins that people do, if they're not getting low enough, if they lose control of their strobe positioning, they get in front of the subject and they just get fixated on the subject and they want to shoot rather than thinking about how they might light it, how they might get the most out of the subject. And and he was able to be very sort of, and he's quite direct. He's from the north of England originally, where he's kind of got this he's got this great humor that goes with his directness. He can get away with saying things to people. And so I think it worked really well, and that's why we're planning to do this workshop as a team for the next few years, once a year. I've got some more statistics though on our workshop that I wrote down. During that 1,000+ dives, we visited 41 different dive sites in Lembeh. And I think this is something that I think is important about Lembeh, is that people often go there with going, oh, this is my favorite site, I want to go there. Oh, please let me go to Nudie Falls or whatever it is. And you get to see the true diversity of Lembeh if you dive different sites there. So we did many of those sites many times. We had 1,000 dives and 41 sites. So we actually repeated a lot of sites a lot of times. But it is important in Lembeh to dive for different habitats because the different habitats have different creatures in.
Yeah.
You're not going to see different animals in different places. So I mean, certain animals in certain places. There's everything from very silty, pure black soft sand to much more coarse, heavier volcanic sand. Then you've got rubble slopes. You've got rubble mixed with reef. You've got small boulder slopes, which the blue rings really like. So they like hopping around from one little boulder to the next one. And then you've got proper reef walls, which again have their own set of different nudibranchs, or might have Denise pygmy seahorses and that sort of thing. And then as you go down towards town, you've got much more human influenced habitats. There's some of my favorite dives in Lembeh are in and around areas where boats are permanently moored, and they create shade and create very
Yeah.
unusual seabed habitats with again a whole range of other species. And I think that's what makes Lembeh so great, is that you have this real variety of dive sites. It's not about one or two sites. You do need to hit a good number of sites there. And what amazes me about Lembeh is, I've been going there for nearly 30 years now. 20 years at Lembeh Resort, but nearly 30 years in Lembeh as a whole. And the diving is just as good as when I first went there. And actually, you see a lot more there now because the dive guides are so much more educated and they're able to find stuff. And first of all, in the old days, we didn't have nitrox, so dives were often quite short at depth. Secondly, there were very little in the way of super macro accessories. I remember one of the first close-up lenses was the Woody and things, and that was the first time anyone could really shoot above 1:1, but only just. That was it was very weak. That was probably not as strong as the MFO1, so which most people now go, it's not even super macro, the MFO1. So so back then people just weren't into the tiny stuff. It was all about who could find the coolest coloured scorpion fish, Lembeh.
Yeah.
And no, it's a bit unfair, but it's changed a lot in that. And the guides have learnt to find so many more species. It would be amazing to take one of those photographers like Konstantinos from the 90s, and say, come on a Lembeh dive now in exactly the same place. And he'd just be there, draw on the floor. I can't believe all these things that we just swam over, we didn't realize were here. And hopefully it will continue like that in the future. And now they've added, obviously, blackwater diving there, so you get a whole range of new species with that. And I love going to Lembeh now, and it's still, and then also all the new dive sites that we dive, and all the resorts probably have their own secret spots, but they're not secret, but spots that they go to. But we went to a number of dive sites that there was 5 or 6 dive sites we went to very regularly that we never ever saw a boat from another dive site center go on. Nice. And I'm sure other dive centers say the same thing. Oh yeah, we go here a lot, and we never see anyone else coming here. But that was, one of those sites had really cool pygmy seahorses at 9 meters. That's less than 30 feet in Lembeh. Yeah. No one's diving it. We're just there going, this is great. They're all queuing up to dive at Nudie Falls to see pygmies there. And we're like, well, we can do those ones. But we've also got, this other place, and several other places as it was. So, and that's just a silly example. But so I really like that side. My next statistic is that we got 305 sort of A-list species across the group. So these are the ones that the dive guides, when they see something special, they actually write it down on their board. So it say, look, this is a really cool stuff. So if it's just a regular clownfish, they're not going to write it down on the board. If it's a cool little, something you see all the time, they're not going to point it out. But if it's a special species, they write it down. And we had 305 of those species seen during the trip, which just shows you, you do a land photography trip, you're probably shooting 3 or 4 species. You go to Lembeh and you're shooting 300 species, different species during the trip. And those are just the A-listers, not, the ones that you maybe, the little blenny, the cute little goby, the anemone fish that you shoot yourself, the kind of cool coral patterns that you shoot. None of those are in that 300 species list. So I really like that aspect of it.
So real quick, if anybody's interested, Konstantinos Petrinos is the guy you're talking about. Realm of the Pygmy Seahorse is a fantastic book. So if anybody doesn't have that, it's worth getting and reading. I've read that through probably 15 or 20 times. But my question was about the critters, which you were just touching on. For you, what were the either the photographic highlights or the critter highlights that stood out compared to other trips to Lembeh, or
Mm.
that you just always enjoy and that you got to shoot this time?
So actually, about halfway through this trip, I'm anyone who dives with me always remarks that I'm ridiculously lucky. Whenever there's anything going on, it just seems to happen right in front of my camera, and all the cool behaviors always just I just happen to be there. And people often say, "Oh yeah, whenever anything cool turns up, I look over and you're the diver next to me because you're always just in the right place at the right time." And during this trip, I felt I was not in the right place. So
Mm.
I think the coolest behavior event that we had on the thing is that we had a female blue ring on one of the dive sites right in front of Lembeh Resort. It's called Pintu Colada. It's like you can swim to it from Lembeh Resort. That dive site had a female blue ring, which is bigger than the males, and she was clearly giving it out pheromone wise. And on one dive, she had 4 males attached to her, which is just
Four.
ridiculous. And we managed to get 2 boats to see this happen that day, and they knew it was happening. And the dive guys came in and go, Alex, you must come and see this. It's amazing. We'll happily take you there just quickly on the boat and you can go and see it. And I just said, look, I'm here with a workshop group. If I go and have a private dive to see this amazing thing, they're
Yeah.
all going to want to kill me. So I'll go again. I'll go tomorrow, because it's time for my boat to go the next day. And if we see it, we see it. If we don't, we don't. And sadly, we saw her, we saw males, but they weren't climbing all over her. So
Yeah.
two of the boatloads of workshop guests got to see this amazing four blue rings all together. It was 3 males and 1 female. Sorry, so it was 4 blue rings together in a photo, which was just fantastic. And these 3 males all competing for this female.
So I can actually sympathize with you with regards to missing cool blue rings, because my only trip to Lembeh, I did see a few blue rings. None of them were especially photogenic, except for the one that I missed. And the one that I missed, we were on, I can't remember which site it is. There's a little tiny jetty at the start, and then it slopes off and gets deep, um, on the west side of the channel. And we're over there diving, and my guide and I decided to stay shallow, just to see what we could find in the shallows. We saw absolutely nothing. And we come up, and the rest of the group comes up after us, and they're all freaking out. And they had a female blue ring standing up on top of a black bottle and just spewing babies out into the water.
Oh my god.
And so I was on the dive, and I still didn't see it. So I can
Oh,
empathize with you missing some cool
yeah.
blue ring behavior, because I'll probably never forgive myself for not going deep on that dive. But it was really cool that I'm glad there were pictures of it. So a couple of people got some really nice images of
Mm.
like the head of the female and one little baby like drifting off into the abyss, which was really cool. So I
Oh,
can empathize with you with regards to
yeah.
blue rings.
I'm usually quite chilled about if I miss something, because it's kind of it's great that the guests got to see it, and
Yeah.
it's always nice. So yeah, for me, the things I'm always looking for in Lembeh are occurrences and sites that I've not seen before. And then another thing we saw during this trip that you as a frogfish lover you'll like is one of the guys photographed a Randall's frogfish, which is a kind of a tall, relatively thin,
Yeah.
a little bit squashed this way frogfish, and a crab below the seabed had caught it, opened up its stomach, and was eating its intestines while the frogfish was still alive, which is pretty gruesome, but kind of amazing behavior. Um, One which those who've seen the Sony 100 review, they had a photo in there from, was of a pufferfish being pulled down
Mm.
into the sand by a predator. That was a pretty amazing bit of behavior. So these are the things that I like in Lembeh, and actually after in the middle of the trip feeling I was always in the wrong place at the wrong time or on the wrong boat at the wrong time. The last few days of the trip, I absolutely wasn't, and was in all the cool places and saw loads of really really amazing stuff. I think the only other sort of remarkable critter sighting, there was obviously a rhinopius that's been resident in the
Mm.
Straits for a while. There's actually up to 4 of them that are around, but one of them likes coming really quite shallow for a rhinopius in Lembeh. Usually rhinopius in Lembeh are quite deep. And this one comes up quite shallow. It moves quite a lot day to day, but it's often quite shallow. And that was popular to see. We had we had hairy octopus sightings on 4 different dive sites, which is also pretty cool. Like you don't get
Yeah.
those every time you go to Lembeh. So to have them on 4 different dive sites that we found was pretty cool. And
Were you able
well,
to get
yeah. Sorry?
Were you able to get images?
Me not, because I didn't. I'm not that fussed with hairy octopus. I've seen them before. I've photographed them before, and I find every time I shoot them, the shots look the same. But I mean, I would like to have seen them, but I didn't. When we had them, I sent guests who were desperate to see that species. I sent their boats there, and I wasn't, and I was quite happy to give my space up on the boat so people could go and try and see them, rather than because you've got a good chance if you go the next dive because when we go there, I control the schedule of all our group split across 5 boats. I control the schedule of all 5 boats, and the way we do it is we put lots of guides in the water on every dive. That maximize, and those guides are sort of instructed. Yes, you're working with this buddy team, but we want all the buddy teams to see as much cool stuff as possible. So we want you spending a little bit of your dive time under guiding, telling the other guides where things are, so everyone is seeing the
Yeah,
maximum on a guide
that's
on a
cool.
dive. And then if they have a good dive, I want them to tell me, and we may well send another of our boats there straight away, armed with the knowledge of where all the creatures were. So the people who go there next get an even better dive because their guides already know where everything is. And yeah, so that's the way we operate. So if we do get a rare encounter, we'll often go, okay, you guys were going to go here this afternoon, but do you fancy going here and trying to see the blue rings or trying to see the
Yeah,
things? And that's
that's
kind of the
cool.
way we
I like that.
operate. And that's the advantage of having the whole resort and having the whole thing focused on our photography. And I
Yeah,
tell all the guests, if you have a really good dive, but maybe the guides don't rate it, make sure you tell me as well, because sometimes, the guides might be going, oh yeah, there was 5 or 6 frogfish, but nothing special. But if all those frogfish are really nice colors and in really good
yeah,
positions, it's worth sending a boat there. The dive guides are just going, oh, painted frogfish, boring. And we're like, no, these are really nice for photos or whatever it is.
yeah.
So, so that's kind of the way we operate. And then the other thing that we had during the workshop that was really cool, and this was Lawrence and Haley, who you know from Florida. Haley's a coral scientist, and she was monitoring the coral spawning, and she
Mm.
had traps out to capture the gametes. And we had a really big coral spawning event during the workshop as well, which we didn't know was going to happen, so we didn't really dive it specifically. But I joined Lawrence and Haley for one dive one evening just to see. And yeah, we over those sort of 3 or 4 nights, they recorded 25 different species of coral spawning.
Oh,
So
that's
in
awesome.
2 years' time, I'm going back there in the same lunar window, and yeah, we should. And then we're actually going to go to a really coral-rich site and do the night dives because we know the timing in terms of days of the month, and we also know the timing after sunset. So we should be able to go and accurately dive and be in the right place at the right time to see really good spawning events when we go back in a couple of years' time.
That's
So
awesome.
that was pretty
I
cool.
know.
Yeah.
I know Nigel got a cool image that he posted of a coral spawn.
Yeah, that
Um,
was actually a sponge spawning at dawn.
Sorry, sponge.
So
Yeah.
so we when we go there we have like an unlimited diving package, and Nigel and his buddy Brian, they were doing an extra dawn dive every day just to get even more, like 7 hours in the water each day or something ridiculous. And yeah, so
Animal.
they went in for a dawn dive and got the reward of sponges spawning, which was
So
actually on the same days as the coral was spawning, but at
that's
dawn.
cool.
Yeah.
So just to follow up on something you just said, when you mean like unlimited, I assume people are assigned to a particular boat for the whole time, correct?
Um, it's more complicated than that on this workshop.
Okay.
So, um, the way I run the workshop, which is you don't need to know, but it is quite interesting, is that the one thing I always find with photographers is they want it to be very fair between the different groups. So, and some dive guides in Lembeh are very famous. Some dive guides are not so famous. So, if you happen to get buddied with a really famous dive guide, after a few days, everyone's like, "Oh, that's not fair. They've got the famous dive guide, and my dive guide is not so famous." So, what we do is we rotate the dive guides in the workshops every 2 days, so that
Okay.
no one feels that they're stuck with a particular guide, or if they're lucky enough to get a really amazing guide, that guide gets shared around. But they're working as a team anyway, so it's not a big deal. And then I rotate the photographers on this workshop every 4 days. I move the buddy teams around through the boats
Oh,
because some
okay.
boats take only 4 guests, some boats take 8 guests, some boats take 6. So sometimes it's nice to be on a small boat, but actually the big boats you have more guides on, and the big boats tend to see a little bit more. People often think in Lembeh, the dream in Lembeh is to be there with a private guide in your own boat. I wouldn't want to dive Lembeh like that because yes, I'd have my own guide and we could go where we wanted to. But actually, like that, you don't have as many people in the water looking for stuff. You put more guides in on a dive, you'll find more stuff. And if those guides are communicating and sharing, you all get to see that. And then if you've got other boats doing that for your next guy dive already, you get even more out of the day. So I really like this teamwork thing. So yeah, we and then so we rotate the dive guides every 2 days and rotate the people every 4 days around the boats.
But then, like, if somebody wanted to go do a dawn dive, like Nigel and
Yeah.
Brian, they can just go snag a guide and snag a boat and ask if they can go out.
So they were doing that on the house reef because they were going before the guides were actually
Oh,
into
okay,
work because they were going so early.
gotcha.
But with the unlimited diving, yeah, you officially you have your guide from 8 a.m. the first dive at 7:30 in the morning through till until the night dive. And the way on this workshop we run we do 3 fixed boat dives each day, and then the 4th organized dive, you have a choice of either doing Mandarin fish, which is kind of just before
Yeah,
dusk, a dusk dive, a night dive, or a blackwater dive or a bonfire dive. And so during the day, you sign up for one of those and you take
I
your
gotcha.
dive guide
Cool.
with you. But if you and your buddy wanted to do something different, then your dive guide would go with one of you and the other one would get a new dive guide. Kind of thing.
Gotcha.
So yeah,
That's
it's
cool.
just kind of the way we do things on the workshop. And then I would just on the gear front, I would talk at the beginning about the camera being heavy. I think some of the things that I think are very valuable in Lembeh is I think neutral density filters can be very useful in Lembeh, and I know a lot of the workshop people really enjoy using those, and people don't talk about them very much. But what they allow you to do is I think a lot of macro shots look good with shallow depth of field. They give separation around the subjects. The problem is that even at low ISOs in the tropics, if you open up to a shallow depth of field, you get a lot of ambient light coming into your shot, even at low ISO. So what a neutral density filter does is it means that you can shoot at f4 at ISO 50 or whatever, ISO 100, and but you don't get too much ambient light coming in. So you have to turn your strobes up a bit more because of the neutral density filter. But those are quite common on the workshops. As we mentioned before, obviously all the macro accessories that you'd want, snoots and all the close-up lenses are really, really popular as well. So those are kind of big gear things. And I'd really encourage people to take multiple macro lenses. I think a lot of people think, oh, it's small, I need my most powerful macro lens. But a lot of the time, it's the wider macro lenses that I think work better in Lembeh. The Micro Four Thirds users were using 30s and 45s rather than 60s and 90s. The full frame users, they were often favouring 60s or 90s over hundreds or 105s or more because of that wider view. So I really like having a range of lenses in Lembeh. I don't, my favourite lenses are what I call the the muck diving workhorse lens, which is a 90mm full frame, 60mm crop sensor, 45mm Micro Four Thirds. That angle is just the most versatile. But if you have a bigger subject, a wider one is better. And if you have a smaller subject, a tighter one is better. So although that should be your first choice, it should never be your only choice.
Yeah.
And it's really good to have that flexibility. Obviously, the MFO3 has really changed that as well, because that then gives you the option of changing lenses underwater, in effect. And if I had to say, in 2025, what one accessory you should take to Lembeh, I would say the MFO3 is more valuable than a snoot. But the next thing should be a snoot, and then after that, it should be beam restrictors for the strobes and a neutral density filter, as high priorities. Beam restrictors allow you to really control and shape your light. So these are beam restrictors, or macro rings as Retro call them. They allow you just to carefully aim your lighting. And one of the things we do during the workshops is really encourage people to shoot with single strobe. Lots of people go down. You might see lots of people taking their cameras in the water with 2 strobes attached. But if you actually pay attention, a lot of the time they're actually only shooting with one of the strobes. And I think that makes a really big difference for macro shooting, particularly in Lembeh technique-wise.
Well, I'm could keep asking about Lembeh and listening to you talk about Lembeh all day, but I think we've probably been talking for a while on this one now. So I think that's probably a good time to wrap up. Thank you guys, as always, for watching. Please leave any comments, questions, concerns down below, and we will see you guys next time.